about a kind of a newly elected Indian chief on a reservation, kind of a remote reservation somewhere. And he was kind of young, kind of new, and really not very in touch with the old ways. And so he was asked, it was getting into fall, and he was asked by the community, the tribe, if it was going to be a cold winter. And he said he didn't know, really looked at the sky, he didn't know. But he said to be on the safe side, yes, it's going to be a cold winter, so let's gather some firewood to prepare for that. But then being practical-minded, he decided to call the National Weather Service and ask for their prediction. And they said, yes, there are indications it's going to be a cold winter. So he went back to the tribe and, a week later and said, gather lots of firewood, it's going to be a cold winter. So they begin doing that. A couple weeks go by, and he decides to check once again with the National Weather Service. And he calls him up, and they go, yes, it's looking more and more like it's going to be a very cold winter. He said, well, how do you know that? He said, well, the Indians are gathering up wood like that. That was a good story. The coldest part of winter, that's basically what that phrase "in the dead of winter" means, the coldest part of winter. When you look around and it looks like nothing will ever grow again, kind of. It's sort of gray and barren, and the color schemes go to little shades of gray and brown, very, very minimal, and everything looks sort of withered. And it's typically about now in Ohio, the dead of winter, wouldn't you say? Around the end of January, beginning of early part of February. That's the deepest, coldest part. And we've really been kind of feeling winter this year in a new way, wouldn't you agree? A little bit more than in prior years. So it seemed like a good time to reflect on the dead of winter, and how, in fact, that phrase is a bit of a misnomer, because it's never really dead. It's never really as dead as it looks. There is life going on in hidden ways that we just aren't seeing, aren't tracking. And if that's true in nature, it's just as true in ourselves and in our lives. It's interesting, for last week I started noticing snowdrops up. If you have snowdrops in your yard, always a surprising sight in the dead of winter to have those little white flowers and green sprouts popping up, but they are coming up already. And soon the Lenten roses will be coming out, because Lent starts this week, this Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, the Lenten process, and it's always during Lent that those perennial flowers begin to bloom in February. It's bizarre. So that's going on, even in the midst of this withered, barren season. Things are beginning to take root, beginning to sprout even now, or preparing to sprout soon. Certainly in the animal kingdom, there's a lot going on. It's not visible to us, but is very much life going on. I've always been fascinated by the hibernation instinct of so many animals. Bears, gophers, woodchucks, mice, bats, snakes, all in winter dens right now. This magical process where they nearly suspend their breathing. This breathing becomes very, very minimal. Their temperature comes way down, their respiration, and they live off what they've stored up, the resources they have. They're prepared for it. They have all that they need. Bears apparently lose anywhere from 15 to 30% of their body weight over the winter in hibernation. It's very much a season of rest to make it easier for them in the long haul. Not so much having to gather food and so on in the barren season. They have what they need already. And interestingly, bears have their cubs while in hibernation. There's a lot of life going on down in those dens that we're not aware of. The woodchucks, too, they will emerge in early spring with their cubs that they've had in the dens and have been nursing in the dens. So there's rest, renewal, even gestation going on in the deadness of winter all around us. I think we have a little of that same hibernation instinct in the winter. There's also what they call torpor hibernators. That was something new to me a few years ago. Torpor means kind of like a deep sleep. Torpor hibernators are like raccoons, and chipmunks, where they don't go into a complete hibernation, but they do slow down and mostly sleep. But they'll wake up in their dens to munch, to eat a little bit, maybe come out to look around for food occasionally. They can, in the deepest parts of winter, in the dead of winter, they can go into kind of a torpor hibernation. I think we do that a little bit in the winter. Don't you feel like winter draws us inward and slows us down, and we spend more quiet time, more indoor time. There's an instinct to do that. In the animals, they call that a HIT, hibernation inducement trigger, something in their blood that induces them to go into hibernation. I think we feel a little of that trigger too. It's like, slow it down, take it inside, into our dens, slow it down a little bit. But I think sometimes we don't think there's anything going on, and there's still a lot going on, just like the animals and the plants in the dead of winter. There is in our barren seasons too, in our wintry seasons, where it seems like not much is happening, and maybe it's a kind of a barrenness that is an emotional, not so much physical as emotional or psychological, that we just feel like nothing is alive, nothing is growing. Feels like a barren season in our lives. I think we can learn something from the rhythm of winter, that in this God-infused universe we live in, nothing is ever as dead as it looks. Never ever. There is always life going on, because this life in us, the God presence in us, is always active, seeking to uplift us and guide us toward greater life and joy and peace and wholeness. So it's not, there's never reason to become discouraged, even in the most barren of times. I think that's the teaching. And we're often fooled by appearances. I think that's why we look around and think nothing is going on in winter, and there's a lot going on. And we can look around our own lives in a season where it seems like nothing is working. And we can be fooled. We can be fooled by appearances. I think that's why there's a wonderful little teaching by Jesus, where it's a kind of a teaching moment with his disciples that's captured in the Gospel of John, chapter 4. And you get the sense that it's a teaching moment. They've just been asking him if he's had anything to eat. It seems to be, they're kind of itinerant in this healing, teaching ministry that they're involved in. And you get the season, it's winter. You get the sense it's winter. It's kind of a barren time. And Jesus sort of seeing that, is able to see more than that, even in the barren grayness. And he says to them, he says, "Do you not say 4 months more, then comes the harvest? But I tell you, look around you and see how the fields are ripe for harvesting." I love that teaching. He saw the aliveness. Even if it looked like the harvest to everybody else was months off, Jesus saw it's alive out there. It is alive. And I think that teaching was important to present, because he knew a truth that's still true for all of us, that we are very easily fooled by appearances. If we don't see evidence of growth right before us, we don't think it's happening. But in fact, it is happening. Life is life, and it's happening at all times, and God is always active, creating in our midst and within us. An important thing to remember, especially if we are going through a barren time. But it's a mystery how it happens in us, in our lives. There's a mystery in it because God's behind it, because there's this power behind it. How things come to us, how a new growth begins to show itself, how those signs of transformation, of healing, of new life, how do they show themselves in our lives? There's mystery behind it. But a big part of it, with us conscious animals, has to do with our minds. Paul said we're transformed by the renewal of our minds. So something new comes into our minds. Something new arises in our minds, in consciousness. And that changes everything. That changes everything. And when that happens, it can be a very kind of hidden thing, a secret thing, and it may not be visible for a while. I've always loved the story of Myrtle Fillmore, which you probably all are familiar with, co-founder of Unity with her husband Charles. And I think one of the things we forget about in retelling the story of how she was healed of tuberculosis and how she and her husband started Unity and so on, we forget the part of the story where it was really, they were in kind of a barren time in their lives. She had been ill with TB since she was a child, treated like an invalid, not expected to have a very long life. Charles had been partially, had kind of a withered leg from an early accident as a boy that hadn't been treated properly by a lot of doctors. And this was in their early married life. Charles was in real estate. And they had been grown up good Christians and so on, but they were seekers, they were spiritual seekers. So they were going to a lot of, it was a time where there were some dynamic spiritual teachers around, like Emma Curtis Hopkins traveling around doing teachings. And they were looking for answers. They were in probably a kind of a barren time, looking for answers to their healing needs, particularly. And so among the resources they looked into was a lecture that they went to by E.B. Weeks. And he was one of these itinerant teachers going around the country. And they went to a lecture by him, and he said something that planted a new idea in Myrtle's mind. It resonated with her, and she heard something new, just a phrase, and she took it home with her from that lecture. And let me find the place where she says about that. She had a revelation after that lecture. She said, the thought came to me. Where do these thoughts come from? The thought came to me that life was of God, that we were inseparably one with the source, and that we inherited from that source. What that revelation did to me at first was not apparent to the senses. It was invisible. Couldn't see it yet. But this new idea had come to her. But it held my mind above negation, and I began to claim my birthright and to act as though I believed myself the child of God, filled with his life. I gained. It's an old-fashioned phrase meaning I improved. I started getting better. I gained. Others saw that there was something new in me. They asked me to share it. I did. That's from Healing Letters. And I think that's, there's so much embedded in that teaching. There's so much there. She got a new idea that being a child of God, being God connected, she was heir to wholeness. She was heir to healing energy. And that planted a new idea that she began to really work with in consciousness. And the evidence of it wasn't visible yet. Just like in winter, in the deadness of winter, it's not evident that anything is going to grow again. But it held her mind above negation. It lifted her up in consciousness a little bit, and she gained. And then the natural instinct is to spread that with others. Others asked and her to share it, and she did. What that led to, she couldn't have imagined. And that's always the way it is when God plants a new idea in our minds. It leads in so many directions and so much farther than we can imagine. They started silent unity prayer groups in their living room. They started writing some things down, putting out a publication called Modern Thought. It became Unity later on. And the ripple effects went on until here we are in a Unity church all these years later. An idea came that made all kinds of things possible in the dead of winter, in a barren time where there was a need for healing and guidance. And an idea came. There's a mystery behind that. Where do these ideas come from? Where do they pop up? I think we can inspire one another as we share these stories. I was reading another one online. It's a charity I've just become quite interested in and decided to support myself with a monthly donation. Some of you might have heard of Charity Water, charitywater.org. I was reading the story of the founder of that, a man named Scott Harrison, and the barren time he went through before he found his calling to do something about that. He had grown up in a suburban home somewhere outside New York City, I think, and kind of a healthy, happy life until he was maybe 4 or 5 years old. his mother became quite ill. Her immune system seriously damaged from a carbon monoxide leak in their home. They didn't know they had. And that changed their lives dramatically. And the rest of her, for years thereafter, she had hyperallergies and wore masks at all times and was on oxygen a lot, became ill a lot. So the little boy had to become responsible very quickly, cooking and cleaning and doing, going out to do things, and had a very kind of overly responsible childhood. And as often happens with kids who have to be too responsible too soon, at about age 18 that stopped and he kind of rebelled. And he went off to live in Manhattan and began to drink and do drugs and discovered he had a gift for nightclubs. He became a club promoter and realized he could, if you got the right people to come into your club, everybody would want to come, and they'd pay exorbitant cover charges at the door and pay $500 for a bottle of wine that cost him $10. And this is kind of how he made his living, in this dissipated way, and was drunk every day for years, making lots of money, opening new clubs around Manhattan, leaving behind the little boy who played piano at church, who wanted to be a doctor when he grew up. Just went through this 10-year kind of journey into another world until it kind of crashed and became very aware that the word he used was bankrupt, that he felt bankrupt in every way, emotionally bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt, morally bankrupt. And the idea came to him he needed to just quit everything. And he did. Where do these ideas come from? In barren times, they just rise up. This is what you need to do. So he sold off a lot of his belongings. He thought he might travel with something. He quit everything he was doing. He thought, I'll serve in some way. That's what came to him. I'll serve in some way. I'll volunteer for some good organization, and I'll do that for a year. And he sent out letters offering volunteer support to a number of worthy organizations, nonprofits, and none of them would take him because of his, checkered recent history, what he'd been doing for 10 years as a club promoter and so on. And except one, and they said if he gave them $500, he could join them for the year. You'd have to pay his way in to be a volunteer. It was an organization called Mercy Ships, and many of us are familiar with that one. I think it's they have a huge hospital ship, and they travel to places like along the west coast of Africa and places like that where there's desperate need for surgeries and treatments. Facial deformities, cleft palates, bent legs, things like that. They just they go travel to all kinds of developing countries and treat people free of charge. So he joined their ship. He got on Mercy Ships as their photojournalist and began to travel with them. And what he saw changed him in a significant way. And that little idea of serve in some way began to kind of morph into something clearer and more focused. One of the things he did when he was in these small rural villages in Africa is with his camera, he'd be going around with him, and he went to the springs where people drew water and saw what they were drinking every day of their lives and cooking in this brown water that they were, women and girls particularly, were walking miles every day to get from some little hole in the wall or some little shallow river, and 40-pound containers, little girls carrying on their backs, women carrying on their backs, to take back, and it had worms and other things in it. And children were getting cholera and dysentery and things like this from this horrible water. And he saw the connection that it must have to do with all there must be a connection with all the sickness of the people coming to the ships for treatment. And he came home at the end of that year with this commitment. Was going to do something about making clean water accessible to all the people in the world who don't have it, which is apparently something like 663 million people don't have clean water. Twice the population of the United States don't have clean water. And every day something like 1,800 children are dying of disease caused by that. It's astounding. So he came back with a mission to do that. He started it, charitywater.org. He kicked it off by throwing a party, something he knew how to do from his years in club management. Invited 700 people, $20 cover charge at the door, and raised all this money. And then he put that money into building 2 wells in Uganda. And then he reported back to those people that all their money had gone into that, and gave them images and clips so that they knew exactly what their money went into. Because in the process of preparing for this, he had learned that almost half of Americans don't trust charities. Don't trust charities. They think the money's going to people's salaries or into people's pockets. So he made a commitment early on he wasn't going to do it that way. All donated money was going to go to the water. And he set up a separate account funded by unique companies and individuals who could afford to pay expenses. He had that expense account for them. But all donations for water went to water. And it's incredible what he's been able to do. I invite you to look at it sometime, charitywater.org. To date, he's put in 24,500 wells, and over 7 million people have been provided with clean water. What an amazing thing. So his new initiative, he calls it the Spring. I joined as to be a person of the Spring. You give a little amount every month, and you become part of this community where you're the spring they're going to draw from for more water projects, more wells. They want water, clean water for everybody who needs it. And it's amazing what that's led to. So this idea popped in a barren time. You're bankrupt. Your funds are gone. You're in the dead of winter here, and you need to quit. Don't make yourself more bankrupt. You need to stop. Total reversal, and opened yourself to something else. You've been serving yourself for 10 years. What about serving in another way? And then that idea led to another one, and it led to a mentor on Mercy Ships, a doctor doing powerful work there, a life of service. What does a life of service look like? He'd not seen that before. And then that led to another thing. And then the ripple effects of that now are so many people getting involved in this charity water. A little girl who decided she, instead of birthday presents, she wanted for her birthday everybody to give a donation to charity water. And then that kicked off all kinds of people of all ages deciding they wanted to do that at their birthdays too. Invite donations. People doing all kinds of things to get in on that activity of sharing the wealth. Sharing the wealth, just like Myrtle's idea. Somehow when we get one of these divinely guided ideas, new idea for ourselves and our lives, it engages us with the outer world as well. Ideas come to us about how to share it. Like Myrtle said, people saw that I gained and asked me to share it. I did. Same thing with Scott Harrison. People wanted in on that. People wanted to say, yeah, this is something I want to participate in too. And the blessings sort of ripple out from there. I think it's important for us to remember that. If we're going through a barren time where it doesn't seem like much is growing, or it just doesn't seem to be a lot of life in our lives, we need to remember the dead of winter is never really dead, and the barren times in our life are never really barren. And the activity of God is constant in us, trying to bring us new ideas to lead us into greater joy and greater fulfillment and greater wholeness. So our job is to stay open, ready to be renewed in our minds, ready to receive a new idea that may transform us, to not give in to discouragement, to stay open and ready to receive those new ideas, and to be alert for ideas when they pop, and don't be quick to say no to them. Sometimes we do that. Would you agree? Some new idea or invitation comes and we go, oh no. It seems like a change. It seems, it's not too difficult to stretch out in a new direction or even entertain this new idea. We need to be ready to say, let me think about that. Could be. It's an idea I want to explore. I'm going to stay open to that. We need to hold space for that new idea to emerge, alert for it, ready to step out on it. So this winter, no idle torpor, no lethargy. This winter, in the dead of winter, a time of real rest and renewal, and maybe gestation of something new to be born in us. That's how we're going to go through the rest of this winter season, knowing God is always life in us, always renewing us, and we are being led and filled with new life right now. So let's take that into prayer for a moment and affirm that truth within each one of us, right where we are, whatever we are experiencing in our lives. We are channels for the life of God. The Creator's Spirit in us is always leading us toward life, toward wholeness, toward fulfillment, toward peace, toward vitality. We know that is the will of God for each of us, and each one of us is inseparable from God. So we are open to that divine Spirit in us. We are ready to receive from it. We are open to new ideas about who we are and who we are becoming, and we are ready to share that gift that flows through us, that energy that flows through us with all who come our way. Thank you, God, for your living presence within us. We are grateful, and so it is. Amen.